Robert Mitchell had everything a man could want. At 62, he'd built Mitchell Industries. From the ground up, a empire of manufacturing plants and real estate that stretched across 3 states. His office occupied the top floor of downtown's tallest building, where he could look down at the city he'd helped shape. But on a gray Tuesday morning in October, everything fell apart. Robert sat frozen at his desk, staring at the computer screen. The numbers didn't lie. His business partner of 30 years had been embezzling funds, making risky investments with company money and hiding the losses. The lawsuits were already filing in. By noon, the board had voted him out. By evening, his accounts were frozen pending investigation. Within 24 hours, Robert Mitchell went from millionaire to broken man. He spent that whole night in his office, unable to face going home to his empty mansion. His wife had passed 5 years ago, and his grown children lived busy lives in other cities. There was no one to call, no one who would understand. As dawn broke, he finally stood up, his body aching from sitting in the same chair all night. The office felt different now. It wasn't his anymore. Security would escort him out at 9 o'clock. He walked slowly around the room, running his hand along the mahogany desk his wife had surprised him with on their 20th anniversary. He looked at the photos on the wall, groundbreaking ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, handshakes with governors and mayors. All of it felt like someone else's life now. At 8:30, he heard a gentle knock on the door. "Come in," he said quietly. The door opened, and there stood Margaret Hayes, wearing her light blue uniform and yellow cleaning gloves. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face was kind, with gentle laugh lines around her eyes. She'd been cleaning this floor for the past 3 years, but Robert had to admit he'd barely noticed her before. "Mr. Mitchell," she said softly, "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say, well, I wanted to thank you." Robert looked at her, confused. "Thank me? For what?" Margaret stepped into the office holding a cleaning cloth in one hand. 2 years ago, my daughter got sick. Really sick. The medical bills were crushing us. I came to work one morning and there was an envelope on my cart. Inside was a check enough to cover everything. The note said it was an employee hardship fund, but I asked around. There was no such fund. It was you, wasn't it? Robert felt his throat tighten. He'd forgotten about that. "You were a good employee," he said simply. "I didn't want you to lose your daughter because of money." "She's healthy now," Margaret said, her eyes glistening. "Because of you, I got to keep my daughter." "That's everything, Mr. Mitchell, that's everything." They stood in silence for a moment, and Robert felt something crack, open in his chest. Some wall he'd built up over the decades of business deals and bottom lines. "I should finish packing," he finally said, turning back to his desk. "Of course," Margaret said. She started to leave, then paused. "Sir, you forgot this one paper." She walked over and picked up a single sheet that had fallen behind his desk. It was wedged back there. "Looks like it's been there a while." Robert took the paper, barely glancing at it. "Thank you, Margaret." After she left, he sank into his chair and looked at the document. It was yellowed with age, the edges slightly curled. His breath caught as he realized what it was. 25 years ago, when Mitchell Industries was just starting to grow, a small tech company had approached him with an invention, something about computer processing that Robert hadn't fully understood. The young inventor needed funding desperately. Robert's advisors had said it was too risky, that the technology might never work. But something about the young man's passion had reminded Robert of himself at that age. He'd given him $50,000 in exchange for a small equity stake. Then life got busy, the company moved, and Robert had completely forgotten about it. The paper Margaret had found was the original stock certificate. With shaking hands, Robert opened his laptop and searched for the company's name. His heart nearly stopped. The company had gone public 15 years ago. It was now a major player in cloud computing technology. Robert calculated quickly. His initial stake, with stock splits and growth, would be worth approximately $40 million. He sat back in his chair, stunned. Then slowly he began to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of a broken man, but something genuine and real. Here he'd spent all night mourning the loss of an empire he'd built, only to discover he'd been sitting on a fortune he'd forgotten about. A fortune built not on aggressive business tactics, but on a simple act of believing in someone. Security arrived at 9 to escort him out, but Robert walked out with his head high, carrying only a small box of personal items and that precious piece of paper. Over the next few months, as lawyers untangled the mess at Mitchell Industries, Robert cashed in his stock. He didn't rebuild an empire. Instead, he did something different. He started the Margaret Hayes Foundation, named after the janitor who'd found the paper that changed everything. The foundation provided interest-free loans to small business, owners with big dreams but no capital. He worked out of a modest office, met with entrepreneurs personally, and looked for that same spark he'd seen in that young inventor 25 years ago. One evening, about 6 months after that fateful day, Robert sat in a coffee shop across from a young woman pitching an idea for sustainable packaging. As he listened to her passion, he noticed Margaret Hayes at a corner table, having coffee with her daughter, a healthy, vibrant young woman in nursing scrubs. Margaret caught his eye and smiled. Robert smiled back and gave a small wave. After his meeting, he walked over to their table. "Mr. Mitchell!" Margaret's daughter stood up. "Mom told me everything. I wanted to thank you. I'm a nurse now at Children's Hospital." "I'm glad you're well," Robert said warmly. Then he looked at Margaret. "I never got to properly thank you. That paper you found, it changed everything." Margaret shook her head gently. "I just picked up a piece of paper. Mr. Mitchell, you're the one who believed in someone all those years ago. You're the one who helped my daughter. That's what changed everything." Robert pulled up a chair and sat down. "Maybe we both did our part," he said. "You know, I spent 40 years building an empire, always looking ahead to the next deal, the next acquisition. I barely noticed the people around me. Losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to me. It helped me see what actually matters." "What's that?" Margaret's daughter asked. Robert thought for a moment, looking out the window at the evening traffic. People hurrying home to their families. "Kindness," he said simply. "Paying attention, believing in people, helping when you can. Those are the things that last. Buildings crumble, empires fall, but the good you do for people that echoes forward in ways you can't imagine." Margaret reached across the table and patted his hand. "You're a good man, Robert Mitchell." It was the first time she'd called him by his first name, and somehow it felt right. As Robert walked home that evening, past the building where he used to reign from the top floor, he felt lighter than he had in decades. He'd lost a fortune and found something more valuable, a sense of purpose, of connection, of what it meant to be truly rich. And it had all started with a janitor in yellow gloves and a kind heart, who'd noticed one forgotten paper and taken the time to care. Sometimes, Robert thought, the smallest acts of attention and kindness are the ones that change everything. Sometimes losing everything is how you find what matters most. And sometimes, the people we overlook are the very ones who help us see clearly again. He smiled as the autumn wind rustled the leaves around him, and he felt, for the first time in years, genuinely grateful for exactly where he was.